Hey Joyce, hey Kimberly, can you hear me okay?
Hi there. Yes, everything. I think we've got a few people getting checked in. So it may be a few minutes after 2 o'clock today.
That's fine, just let me know when we're all ready. Thanks.
Of course. As a call-in user, could you please let us know your name and who you're representing today? have a call-in user number 1. Could you please identify who you're representing and your name, please? Madam Chair, we have a quorum now.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. We'll get going right off the bat, and I'm looking for someone to make a motion to approve the minutes of October 16th, 20.
This Bob Day, so move.
Thanks, Bob. Do I have a second? Second out there?
I'll second Charlie
There's
Watt.
Gerald Pulmar around Rock.
Okay.
Second.
All right. Do I have anyone opposed to the minutes? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on. We have a full agenda of information today. So, Mr. Collins, if you'll start us off on item number 3, discussion on funding of deferred projects.
Absolutely. So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So this item, I want to bring this information item. This is something that we presented to the Transportation Policy Board a couple of weeks ago. So largely this presentation is the same, but I do want to kind of update everyone in the Technical Advisory Committee and kind of go a little bit more in depth on a few things and really talk about the process leading up to what's eventually going to be a recommendation to the Policy Board. An action item, recommendation and action items to the policy board in February, hopefully. So I know we've got a lot of members of the TAG that weren't here in 2020, but when we went through the deferral process for I-35, we deferred selection. I believe it was 55 projects in total. 26 of those projects were funded with Surface Transportation Block Grant funding, which is under the purview of the policy board. And so as part of that process, the policy board committed to refunding the deferred projects that are prioritizing projects that were deferred for refunding when funding became available. So to date, we've refunded 9 projects. 13 projects were removed out of those 26 for different reasons. And then we're down to the 4 remaining projects that are listed here. We've got 2 from the city of Austin. This is West Frunberg Lane and Lakeline Boulevard, as well as Pierce Lane and Breaker Lane North, sponsored by Travis County. And so just to kind of talk, if you'll go to the next slide, this process, we really kind of kicked it off in July. And what we are doing, or what we have been doing over the last 6 to 7 months, is assessing these projects for readiness. Looking at the financial forecasting that we have on STPG funding, we start to see money become available basically in fiscal year 26 and beyond. And so what we wanted to do is assess these 4 projects to see if we had enough information, and assuming that they were continuing in development. That's one thing I do want to point out, is that when we deferred the projects, the board was going to prioritize these projects, but it was under the assumption that the sponsors would continue to get the projects ready for construction. As you all know, there are a lot of steps between preliminary engineering and getting it ready for construction letting. And so we were evaluating those projects to see where they were in the development process and to see if we could confidently schedule those projects in the upcoming 2025 to 2028 TIP for potential refunding. And so, we basically started in July, and here we are today, kind of towards the tail end of this. I do want to point out this has been a very collaborative process, and I want to thank Travis County and City of Austin and TxDOT as well. we've all been working a lot over the last 6 months to make sure that we've got all the information we needed to make a recommendation. But it's been a collaborative process, and it's still continuing. Actually, we still have a couple of meetings to go, but things are going well. So let's go to the next slide. I do want to talk individually about the projects and where we are. Essentially, out of the four, we do feel like we can potentially recommend 2 projects for rescheduling. The first is Pierce Lane. This is sponsored by Travis County. This was originally funded for fiscal year 2022 prior to the deferral. This will upgrade a 2-lane roadway to a 4-lane divided with sidewalks and bike lanes. We do have an active AFA currently for engineering and environmental. The design is at 90% to Wolf Lane and 30% east of Wolf Lane. The estimated completion for the NEPA process is February 2024. I do want to point out Travis County has to, once the NEPA clearance is completed, they do have 43 parcels in Travis County to acquire. One thing that I want to point out with the cost estimate, if you watched the policy board meeting in January, we had the cost estimate at $70,515,000. And this is east of Wolf Lane. And so the original limits that were deferred in 2019, which were approved through an amendment process, that estimate is $65.7 million, and that's to Wolf Lane. And so our recommendation to the policy board will be to refund that portion, with the delta being under discussion currently. So with this one, we would recently schedule that one based on the readiness assessment. We believe it will be ready for fiscal year 2028. If you go to the next slide, please. The next one is Lakeline Boulevard. This is a City of Austin sponsored project in Williamson County. It was originally awarded in fiscal year 2018 for $11 million. And this is also a 2-lane roadway that we're going to take to a 4-lane with, and it's currently got sidewalks on one side, but it'll have sidewalks and bicycle facilities along the length. Again, this one also has an active AFA for engineering and environmental. The design is at a 60% schematic. This was refunded by CAMPO in 2021 with CARES Act funding. The NEPA is estimated to be complete this summer. There is no right-of-way acquisitions needed for this project, and the current cost estimate is $23,999. And we would look to reschedule this one in fiscal year 2026. We still are in discussions with the City of Austin, with the Watershed Department, some new requirements that are pending. So we're hoping to have that resolved prior to the policy board meeting. So the next 2 projects I'll go through quickly. West Rumberg Lane, we currently don't have enough information to make a recommendation on this project. We are meeting with the City of Austin tomorrow, so I'll let everyone know, obviously, in the policy board meeting, there are updates there. But currently, we don't have enough information to move this project forward with a recommendation. And the last one is Breaker Lane North. This project, we had a lot of discussions between the county and the city. This project has been withdrawn from the process voluntarily by Travis County. It may potentially be resubmitted at a later date as a City of Austin sponsored project in a future project call, but that remains to be determined, by the sponsors, obviously. But for the purposes of this project process, Breaker Lane North is going to be removed from the process and will not be recommended for refunding. Go to the next slide. So talking about the refunding scenario, and I'll talk about the financial implications in the next slide as well. But currently, with the 2 projects, Lakeline Boulevard and Pierce Lane, with those 2 estimates, the board would be looking at a commitment of $84 million with additional TDCs tied to the Pierce Lane project. Pierce Lane originally had TDCs awarded to it in the original application, so we would update that number of transportation development credits to cover the federal share. So we'd be looking at $84 million commitment from the policy board. To go to the next slide. One of the other things that was brought up in the policy board meeting was the potential set-aside scenario. So we were asked, as I mentioned earlier, we had 13 projects removed from the deferral process. Those projects were removed for a litany of different reasons. So we looked at these projects and identified those that were voluntarily removed by the project sponsor and then implemented by that project sponsor using local funding. And so of those 12 projects, 4 potentially meet that criteria. You see the 3 lists from the City of Austin. Those are ITS projects. And you have their original award amounts there. And then the City of Cedar Park's New Hope Drive, which was originally awarded $12 million. So as we review that, we are still waiting on confirmation from the City of Austin on the ITS products on their implementation. But another part of this is also that the board requested that we look at the actual costs to these sponsors for those products. So I do have confirmation from the City of Cedar Park, and I want to thank Tom Godala for being very responsive on that request. That project was let a few years ago for a cost of $22 million. And so the board is considering potentially a set-aside scenario to honor those funding. So we'll see where that goes. But obviously, if there's any process considerations or anything like that from the technical advisory committee, I'd love to hear them. And we'll go to the next slide. I think this is my final slide. This is really talking about the impacts of these financial decisions by the policy board. So right now, I do want to point out that the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investments Jobs Act, is our current federal authorization, carries us through 2026. So anything beyond that are projections. We're assuming continual resolutions in 2027 and beyond. But what I want to point out is everything that you see in yellow. This is about $107 million worth of funding is currently committed to projects, but has not been obligated yet in the federal financial system. So that still has to come off the books. So given that, starting in 2026, our STBG funding specifically starts to become available for rescheduling. And so if you look at the refunding scenario that we're evaluating today, the $84 million would take care of essentially most of the funding in fiscal years 26 and 27. If we do a potential set-aside scenario, assuming those ITS projects get confirmed, we'd be looking at additional years of funding for that set-aside scenario. Looking at that, and so obviously the implications there for, one of the big discussion items is when can we have a project call? That really just depends on the actions of the policy board and depending on where we're before there. So we are also, I do want to point out, I don't have the TASA and CRP funding highlighted in this, but we will try to allocate as much TASA funding or CRP funding into these refunding scenarios and set-aside scenarios as possible if we can, alleviate some of the burden on the SBG funding and activities allow us to do that. But that's something we will certainly consider, but it won't have a significant impact on the overall financial forecast. So with that, I want to point out that, our job in this process is really just to bring a recommendation back to the policy board based on their commitment and based on whether or not we think these projects, that the sponsors have done what they've needed to do since the deferral, and that we can confidently reschedule these projects in the future. And I do want to point out also that any recommendation, obviously there are a lot of steps still for these project sponsors on these two, specifically Lakeline and Pierce Lane, that still need to get done. And we will monitor those closely. But, given the information that we have today, I feel like we can make a confident recommendation on those two projects. So sure, there'll be some discussion. So I'll open up the floor for questions.
So Lori, before you open up the floor, let's sort of go back to the beginning a little bit and even equal slides. So we're presenting this not because we're asking the TAC today or in the future to approve the projects. We don't want to put y'all in a position of feeling like you're being pitted against each other on terms of projects. What we would like your opinion on is the process and the analysis that we went through, because this is what we're going to show the board for them to help inform their decisions. So that's the basis of what this is about today. And then picking up at the end of where Ryan left off, I know several of you have asked about when is the next project call and how much money do we think that project call may be. And as you can see from the slide, the worst, well, I shouldn't say worst case, but I've just said worst case, so we keep going. So if both the two deferred projects that are moving forward are funded, and then the set-aside scenario is also funded, and we're looking at 2029 before there's any money freed up. So I want to make sure y'all understand that's what that's telling you. So quite a while yet, if those two things are funded. So with that, I'll stop and talk.
Thanks, Ashby. Gerald, did I see your hand go up?
No, it wasn't me.
Wasn't you?
I'm just listening right now.
Okay. I guess the one question I have is many of these projects, just like all of our construction projects, have really increased in cost since pre-COVID. The process right now does not anticipate any additional funding on the local side. Was there, and I can't remember, was when we originally submitted projects, is there usually a percentage match that we're looking for? Just remind me on how that was done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So most of the, all federal funding, SCDG, actually all of the programs there that are listed on the left do require a 20% match. So that is included in these projects. The Pierce Lane has transportation development credits on it. And so the federal share covers the entire project cost on that. But that's, and the maintenance of effort, obviously with TDCs, Travis County is still committed to spending the equivalent of a local match on other projects, and they've got some other projects in the eastern part of the county that are going to be picking up that maintenance of effort burden. But there's a 20% match, so obviously if we award more federal funding, the local government still has to bring in that 20%.
So the funding that you're showing is the 80% funding, and like you said, the local match on the would then be updated to have that 20%. So on the total, I guess I'm trying to remember if you go back a couple of slides where you had it.
Oh yeah, and I do want to clarify. Yeah, so if you look at I'll break it down in if you go to that one. So you can see the federal share, that 84 million is the federal share, and then you got the local share, which is the 20%, either that or TDC. So both of those are equivalent to 20% under that. But from the policy board's perspective, the 84 million, that's strictly federal money that they would commit. And I do want to point out, because I think a lot of times, and I know this is the way TxDOT represents their funding, they include the local match in that funding authorization, but I've broken it out here. So, and then that final slide, that is pure federal funding, does not include local match. That hopefully that clarifies that.
Okay. So anybody have any comments on the process that CAMPO went through to analyze these?
Lori, this is Ed.
Hands up, I see Cole and Ed over here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ed.
On the slide that's currently showing, that shows a CRP. I guess that means that those funds have been obligated to projects of $14 million. Is that the way I'm reading this?
Yeah, so you remember we put 4 million on the transportation development, or excuse me, transportation demand management program, then $1 million on the mobile emission reduction plan, and then 7 went to the ITS project that's on SH71.
Okay.
And I do want to point out the CRP and TASA have that 4-year time limit, but that's
Okay.
where that 13 million is going. So there's 3 projects.
Okay, thanks. I didn't realize that 7 million went to ITS type projects. One thing I might want to point out, we kind of all knew that, there weren't going to be any money available after, I-35 sucked up so much, and so like a 10-year window that there wasn't going to be much money available. But also with the cost increase, just my observation is that, we have 2 projects that are refunded that are going to take up 2 years of allocation. That's just the way it goes. But it's almost like we kind of need to start thinking, how are we going to do anything if we can't do anything for another 5 or 6 years on air quality, other variety of things about how are we going to be creative, because our federal funds are just in that situation that we don't have any availability. And I'm just wondered about our region being able to keep up with growth. We've never been able to anyways, but this makes it even a different scenario of how do we become creative on moving forward on a variety of things that relate to mobility, but also air quality.
That's a good point.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else? I mean, I feel like the process you laid out was very good. Reading through your documentation, it seems like it's very collaborative and it's honoring the commitment that was made, when these projects were deferred. So I don't know, unless anyone has any other comments that they might want to weigh in on about the process.
Hey Lori, this is Richard
Hey,
in
Richard.
City of Austin. How you doing?
Good.
So I just want to say I appreciate the process, and no, and I understand that this prior commitment to refund these deferred projects were made by the policy board in 2020. I really feel that we need to, at all possible, stick to that commitment. And I do want to thank CAMPO staff for affording me an opportunity tomorrow to present up-to-date information on Runberg Lane that I'm hopeful will retain it on this list of projects for consideration for refunding. And so also on the Lake Line, I'm working very hard with our own watershed protection department to get some allowances based on grandfathering, if you will, that will help that project. And I've got my engineering team working very diligently on these two very priority projects for our city. Runberg, I think in the last ranking, it ranked number 6 total. And being relatively new to this quorum, less than a year, I'm getting up to speed as quick as I can. But I just want to appreciate your leadership, Lori, and the collaborative nature of our TAC committee thus far.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, hearing no other discussion on this.
Lori, Bob
Oh.
got his hand up?
Sure, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Quick question. I realize that it appears that, if I understand this correctly, there would not be a program call until when is anticipated, I guess is my first question, for the STBG money. And then when would you anticipate a program call for the CRP and TASA money?
So for the STBG, I'll start with that one, just depending on where we end up. Assuming the refunding scenario goes forward, we would do a project call, probably calendar year 2026 is when we would start that off, assuming this process takes a year. And depending on how far out we want to schedule. If there's a set aside scenario, we'd be looking at probably calendar year 27. CRP, that's a little bit different because we are waiting on the mobile emission reduction plan, which is waiting to get kicked off. It's sitting in the STIP along with the TDM program, unapproved yet, so we can't move forward with those. That's a statewide issue, doesn't have anything to do with us, but that's been holding us up. But that was going to kind of dictate when we did a CRP funding call, because that was going to set up a criteria and an evaluation system for that funding. TASA funding is something we may be able to do a small TASA funding call, or we could potentially put some TASA funding on some of these deferred projects as well. And I would prefer to do that, obviously, because that funding has that timing issue with it. So, but if we do a TASA, it would be a small TASA call, essentially. That's what we're be looking at. And CRP, yeah. Does that answer your question, Bob? I know it's kind of rambling there, but just a lot depends on what happens.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if you could get those 3 answers from the board when they make a decision, or at least provide information to the board on what your reasonable expectation is for program calls. Because as you guys know, that's probably the most popular question. And
Yep.
That's what everybody needs to know in order to plan their local activities.
I can certainly
Thank you.
update the slide to kind of illustrate that. So.
No, I'm saying is if you could try to get staff and the board to have a plan for when the program calls would be, so that all of the staff members for all of the agencies would have a clue as to what the expectation is, so that we're not surprised. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. That's a good point. So, okay, anyone else? Did I miss any other raised hands?
Boston, I do need clarification on the schedule.
Okay,
The schedule shown in the backup on page 12 was different than what was shown in the slides. It has this item going to the board in March for action.
Yeah, that schedule's been changing a lot, so that's probably an outdated schedule in the backup materials. The one in the presentation is the one that counts. So, make sure.
Cole, we normally don't have a March board meeting because they don't like to meet during spring break.
so I'm glad Cole asked that question. So does that mean that this does not come back to TAC? It's going to go directly from this meeting to the policy board?
Yeah, that's the intent.
Okay, so there is not a TAC recommendation on this because this was just for information only.
Yeah.
Yes. Since this is financial, no recommendations. But we ask about processing.
Okay. Okay. All right, then. Item number 4.
Thank you. So this item is a discussion on a new performance measure. So we do have 2 performance measure related items at the policy, or excuse me, here at the technical committee. So this first one is a new one related to greenhouse gas emissions. And want to point out that again on the performance measure goal areas, these are goals that are set by Congress. You got the 7 on the left, and the one that's being used for this new rule and greenhouse gas emissions is the environmental sustainability rule. And so FHWA has finalized a rulemaking that's been kind of churning up in DC for quite a while, but it was finalized in December of last year. And so TxDOT and CAMPO are required to set targets related to greenhouse gas emissions, and then we have to incorporate those into our plans and programs. If you'll go to the next slide. And so what's important about these targets is that they do have to be declining. It's a 4-year target. Another thing that I want to point out that's actually really interesting about this one is that we have to set a joint target with the Alamo area MPO for the San Marcos urbanized area. So as with other targets, we, CAMPO, can adopt and support the state's targets, or they can opt to set their own. So TxDOT is required to submit. So TxDOT is required to set targets by February 1st, 2024. And then we have 180 days within that window to establish our own. So as Nir will talk about, we do a performance measure report every January and February. And so this will be kind of out of sync with that, but we're also not sure when and how the state's going to adopt their performance measures. And so Nir is working with AMPO we can provide. Yeah, that was going to say the same thing. So if you'll just go to the next one, please. A couple of important things. The statutory authority of FHWA to mandate greenhouse gas targets has been challenged by the Texas Attorney General. A lawsuit has been filed similar to other states, Florida as well. So we're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen there. I'm going to hand this over to Ashby to kind of talk about the implications of that. But also just want to point out that we were going to consider voluntary target considerations as part of the mobile emission reduction plan, which is currently awaiting federal approval, as I mentioned earlier. So that was an important part. We knew this rulemaking was kind of in the works, and so we wanted to kind of get ahead of that, but it looks like something's been finalized, and so we're kind of feeling that out. But at that point, I'll hand it over to Ashby to kind of go into a little more detail on that.
So, like Ryan said, we're waiting to see what TxDOT is going to do in terms of setting a target for this, because our timeline is pivots off the text timeline in the requirements. One of the things that we're still trying to get a handle on is whether or not this new rule will open us up to litigation. If you read the Federal Register notice on this item, it's quite lengthy, and they spend a fair amount of space and time laying out how they got to this point. And part of the explanation is that this is no different than the other targets that we set as part of the planning process. So safety and state of good repair and things like that. And the reference that the statutory reference that they use for that is 23 United States Code subsection 150. When you read that, that's exactly in line with what's in we're doing now in terms of those items. But then you read a little bit further in the register notice, and they make reference to 23 United States Code subsection 149. That's air quality conformity. Conformity is on the regulatory side. It is not on the planning side. So it's unclear to me why there's a reference to 149 if this is about the planning side. So that we're still trying to get questions on. I have asked Federal Highways folks here in the Texas Division the question of whether or not we will be open to litigation. They were running that back up to headquarters. We have not gotten a response back yet. So in terms of the targets for CAMPO itself, as Brian stated, we were kind of already looking at doing, not necessarily setting targets, but we were going to look at different strategies and try to figure out which strategies could we recommend to the board that might make the most impact in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions over time. It's one thing to voluntarily do, it's another thing to be forced. So, and what concerns me more is that not only are they saying you have to do this, but they said it has to be declined. So it's no surprise to anybody on this call that we're experiencing and have been experiencing rapid growth in this region. We're projected to double our population over the next 20, 25 years. As I have said several times before, whether we're talking about traffic or other things, if we can manage to hold, we can experience the rapid population growth that we're having and hold both congestion levels and other things to today's numbers, then I would consider that to be a success. Now we're being told it has to be declining, but there is no penalty for not meeting the target, at least not today. But I still have questions about where we're going. As I stated to someone earlier this morning about this very topic, if you look at Florida Department of Transportation, their approach is they don't agree with it, they think it's government overreach, and they're just not going to do it. There's litigation out there already, complaints that have been filed. Florida, then Kentucky and a consortium of other states are about to file, and the Texas Attorney General has also filed a complaint on this. So until I'm told otherwise by the board, our approach is that this is the rule, this is law, until there's a change in litigation that says otherwise, we're going to follow it. So with that, I'll stop and see what questions are.
Okay, I have a couple questions, but I will defer to other folks. Okay, I'll start, not seeing anyone. So my first question is, and I only skimmed this, but does the science agree with how they're calculating these tailpipe emissions based upon gas sales and miles traveled divided by something? I mean, what's the take on that? I guess maybe I don't fully understand how you're calculating it.
Lori, I haven't seen anybody challenging the calculations. Yet it's been more about process. But I will say to you, and this doesn't directly go to the calculation issue. One of the things that concerns me is during the height of the pandemic, when nobody was driving, we had emissions, we had exceedances across the country in several locations, and we still don't know why. That to me needs to be explained and talked through. And it would suggest that the current standards are at background levels. That's why we saw the exceedances during the height of COVID. But it could be something else. I don't know.
Okay. It just I guess I struggle a little bit with the gas sales and the accuracy of that data. I don't know.
It's a rough proxy. I agree with you.
Yeah. And then the second thing, Ryan spoke about it, and it's kind of pertaining to my area, but because San Marcos is a small urbanized, does that mean that AMPO and CAMPO set a joint target, or is CAMPO's target one and then San Marcos, AMPO, CAMPO is a separate one? How does that work?
Yeah, we'll have two separate targets. We'll have one for the CAMPO region, and then there'll be a separate joint one with AMPO specifically for San Marcos. It'll be a unique number. Depending on how you interpret the rule, I think that number, normally, and I think what we do here is, if the state approves a GSU target, we'll probably just go ahead and adopt that one, make that recommendation. But it's my understanding that the one for the San Marcos area has to be unique and can't be the state's. So we're looking into that, but yeah, it'll be a unique number for your area.
Man, I feel like I'm getting kicked out of the club.
You're in two clubs. That's the.
Laura, this is Ed Collins. Maybe point
Sure.
of clarification. I was wondering if the San Marcos urbanized area dips down into Comal County, which is the jurisdiction of, or Guadalupe County, which are kind of the jurisdiction of AMPO.
I think a little bit goes into Guadalupe. Yes. So Ed, a little bit goes into Guadalupe.
I believe so.
It does. That's
Yeah,
part of
that's
why
great.
this is happening.
Yeah, I think that's maybe why you have to coordinate with the Alamo area.
Yeah, I understood that, we were in both. I just didn't know that we would have to have our separate target. So that's interesting. So at this point, Ashby and Ryan, we're not moving forward till we hear something from TxDOT. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm on
And
a panel with Mark Williams, start of February, the Astro Policy Conference, and this is one of the topics. So I'm hoping to get some sense of where TxDOT is headed with this, because we don't know what they're going to do right now.
And do we have to set this with the annual performance measures that we're getting ready to set?
Yes.
Yeah, that'll get wrapped in starting next year. I think it'll be off schedule this year, but next year it'll be on schedule, assuming we have a target to adopt. One other thing I wanted to point out is that this, at least in the rulemaking and in the regs, there's a slightly different enforcement kind of module component to it, where if you don't meet the greenhouse gas targets that you set, that you have to document how you're going to address that, which is a little bit different. I mean, in the performance metric process with all the other things, you have to document how your portfolio of products you're selecting is impacting it. But this one has a little bit tighter, I think, component to it where, I mean, it seems like it's a little, I don't know, more robust, I guess is the word for it.
Yeah, and to me, in plain English, this is air quality conforming in all but name.
Okay,
I had a question, Lori. I don't know if you can see
Okay.
my hand. This is Kathy.
hey,
I just
Kathy.
wanted to return briefly to the discussion you were asking about the calculations. And then Ashby mentioned that we had exceedances during COVID. And it just led me to think we need to be sure we're not mixing all the various pollutants together. It's my understanding this is a greenhouse gas target. And I'm guessing, but I'm not positive, that the exceedances that we saw were for ozone. And so
Some of them work,
ozone,
Kathy. Some of them work.
they were. So
Yes.
as we know, ozone is a reactive pollutant that's formed based on heat and wind and not just the amount of pollutants that are put out there. So that could explain somewhat why we had lower tailpipe emissions, but we still had exceedances because of the heat and the weather can do that. So I just would caution us all as we move forward to try and keep all, and it's going to be really complicated because there's, probably 10 different pollutants we're going to have to keep our eye on, but keep our eyes on which requirements apply to which pollutants and not mix them up.
I agree, Kathy, and I appreciate that. And I also say the exceedances that we saw on ozone during COVID was in winter.
Was what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
During the winter.
Winter. Yeah, that
so
was weird too.
Not peak of summer.
Not heat, but something
Oh,
weird.
not
Yeah.
heat. Something's going on.
Yeah.
But yes,
Okay.
you're right. We got to be careful about making sure folks understand which pollutants we're talking about.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kathy. That was good reminder for us because I don't always remember that. So, okay, anyone else? For some reason, I'm not doing a good job on seeing hands today, so just call out if you need to. All right, hearing none. Item number 5, continuing the good air news.
All right, so this is my item. So at the January meeting of the Transportation Policy Board, CAMPO staff during the transportation planning activities informed the policy board members about the fact that there is a possibility, or a greater possibility than ever before, about this region possibly being designated as non-attainment by the Environmental Protection Agency. So we thought this would be a good meeting just to give everybody some background on how that process works, what goes into the decision-making process, and what is expected of us as a region and as local governments. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we have to talk about is, when you're trying to figure out whether a region is or is not in attainment, you have to monitor the region's air quality to see whether we're meeting what's known as the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. We'll just concentrate on ozone right now. There are 6 pollutants that EPA wants a region to monitor, but we'll just concentrate on ozone right now. And so there are 2 monitors in our region that are owned and operated by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Some of y'all may know with your work with CAPCOG that there are numerous other monitors in the region, but those 2 that are owned and operated by TCEQ are the only ones that collect and send data to the EPA. Those are the ones that are used to determine whether we are or are not in attainment of the NAAQS standard. So since the Clean Air Act was passed in 1990, there was a standard that was set for acceptable concentration of ozone in the air. Since that time, the standard has been lowered 3 times, most recently in 2015 when it was set to 70 parts per billion. And what the graph below shows is that the way that's calculated is that they use a 3-year average of each monitor's 4th highest number. So if you look at the top line there, just for the years of 2017 and 2019, when you see it's for 2017 for the top line of a value of 67, that was, for that monitor, the 4th highest value that it reached for the year 2017. And then there's an average there. That's what's called your design value of how much did your region reach. And if one of your monitors goes above 70, that means you are not meeting the standard. As you can see, for the years 2017, 2019, our highest was a 68. Next slide, please. So in terms of historical performance, this region, I would say, has done quite well despite aggressive increases in population and multiple lowerings of the standard. We have not ever been really in threat of being designated as non-attainment. That pretty much held ever since the passage of the Clean Air Act in 1990, up until last year, even through August of, sorry, not last year, 2022, and even through August of last year. Next slide, please. And then we had a few really bad days, actually a few really bad months of summer last year with extreme heat in August and September, just drove our numbers pretty much through the roof. And with that second monitor there at the bottom, nudged our 3-year average to above 70. So technically we are not meeting the standard, but that does not result in an automatic non-attainment designation. So let's talk about that process. Next slide. So how this works is that the only way, or not only way, the traditional way that that EPA will start to determine whether a region is or is not in attainment of the standard is the first thing that they do is they set the standard. And usually they do that process every 5 years. The last time they did it, I believe, was in 2020. But in August of last year, they decided to do an off-cycle review. So that's starting this year. That graph shows the very intense process that is used. There's various milestones that they have to hit. That's where EPA staff, for those thin blue circles, that they do. And there's an advisory committee that it provides information to the EPA administrator on what they think the standard should be. And then the EPA administrator will make a decision on whether to keep or revise the standard. And then after that, once he makes or she makes that decision, the federal rulemaking process begins. Both of those steps are in the thick blue circles. There are no real timelines for when that can occur. Next slide, please. So let's say that the EPA administrator decides to lower the standard or and then goes through the rulemaking process. Once that's complete, it's incumbent upon the states to send to the EPA all the regions within their state that do not meet the standard or are designated as non-attainment. They have to do that no later than 12 months after the date of revision is complete. 12 months after that, no later than 12 months after that, the EPA determines the final designation. Sometimes they could take even another year to do that. So next slide. So what does that mean for us if we're just thinking about, okay, how does that all affect us? So just thinking about the earliest possible timeline based on the past, given what we know from what EPA has put out, the earliest that the EPA administrator would make a decision would be winter of this year. And then if we were talking about a lightning speed when it comes to federal rulemaking, winter of next year is when it would be finalized. At that point, the state of Texas would have until winter of 2026 to send its data about which areas are or not in attainment to the EPA. But they would be using 2023 to 2025 data. They would have to use the latest data available to send to the state. And then at that point, the EPA would make its final designation probably in winter of 2027. I just want to point out that the first two steps are the ones that are like the most vulnerable to change and delay. A change or a delay in one kicks off the succeeding delay in the rest of the steps. Next slide, please. So in the event that the region is designated as being a non-attainment, the next step is to determine what classification of non-attainment are we in. Those 4 categories are right there, each one more strenuous than the other in terms of what you need to do to get back into attainment. Odds are we will be classified as marginal, because usually marginal means that you are either 1 or 10 parts per billion above the existing standard. At that point, what we have to do, the MPO, is we have to submit a plan of how we're going to reach attainment no later than 12 months After we were designated as non-attainment, we have to submit that to Federal Highway, to the Federal Highway Administration. And then we also have to demonstrate how our TIP and our plan and our projects conform to the state's air quality implementation plan. To do all that would require coordination with all of the agencies that are listed in the bottom left corner. And I should also say, it's not just coordination, it's approval. You have to get a sign off, a checkbox from each of those agencies that they say it's okay that that these projects do not significantly add or do not add more emissions than allowed in the state's implementation plan, otherwise known as the SIP. And when I say projects, I mean they have projects that are titled designated as regionally significant. So whether they have federal funding or don't, they have to meet approval. So anything, let's say, greater than a mile on a road, if you're going to expand, if you're going to add capacity on a corridor greater than a mile, that has to meet approval. If you're going to change signal timings in your city greater than a mile, that has to be approved. So what this means is a great amount of delay, greater amount of expense, and a greater amount of information that we have to provide before these projects get approved. And I'm going to let Ashby, I'm going to turn this over to Ashby because he's got a lot of experience with this. See if he has anything else to add.
I'm probably not going to add a whole lot to that. I felt like I've talked a lot already today about air quality, but I just will, reiterate that going non-attainment adds a lot of time and a lot of expense to the process, the planning and project development process that we've been using. So we will do our level best to, if there's room to maneuver within EPA and TCQ's process, we will do our best to maneuver within that. But right now we're waiting to see what happens. Having said that, we're not going to sit here and just sort of wait and see, till 2027 to see what happens. We will continue to monitor it, but also start to prep in case we actually are designated non-attainment so that we can hit the ground running, but also so that you as the local governments and member agencies aren't sort of caught off guard and all of a sudden have to get chipped. And I believe that's all my slides. So see some hands up. So get ready for discussion. Last. Okay. Kathy's name is gone.
Kathy, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I think Bob was first, so Bob, go
Okay.
ahead.
Doesn't make any difference in order. I guess I'm a little confused. So although we exceeded previously, it's still the next rulemaking that is going to cause us to be non-attainment? I was a little confused on that explanation. It would seem to me that if we exceeded the 70, we would have violated the current rule and we would be awaiting notification that we were being reclassified. Could you explain that?
Right. So EPA only does its reclassifications only after they've set the new standard. So the state of Texas doesn't set, no state sends their attainment or non-attainment areas like on an annual basis or anything like that. It's only when the new standard has been set and finalized that they then set those. Yeah.
Okay. I'm with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have one clarifying question on that, Nirav, is what if they set the new standard at 70? If they decided to keep it at 70, do they have that option or does it always go down?
Oh, no, they have that option. That's what they did in 2020. And if that happens, then, it really depends on what our average is at the time that they make that decision.
Okay, thanks. Kathy?
Well, just a couple things. Number one is I had heard also that we might be going non-attainment for PM 2.5. I don't know if we have any information on that, but that's something else we should be watching for? Because that's a whole different set of measures, or somewhat different than what you would do for ozone. And then I wanted to really make a plea that when you look at the schedule that Nirav laid out, it's going kind of hand in hand with the schedule for adopting the 2050 plan. So it would behoove all of us as we're working on the 2050 plan to really try and structure it and get projects in there that are going to help reduce emissions, so that if we do end up having to do conformity, they'll run the model for the whole plan. So we really want to be very careful and very strategic with that 2050 plan.
Thank you, Kathy. That's very helpful. So we are watching PM 2.5. There's talk and there's an expectation that EPA is going to either come back and tell all of us, nation, that they're going to leave that where it is, or they're going to lower that PM 2.5 standard as well. So we're waiting. We're waiting to see. Near, you probably have more information than I do.
But that was the same too. Okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, then item number 6, Nirav.
Bob, was your hand?
No, it's an old hand.
Is it all hand?
Yeah, I just had one other comment, if you don't mind. Back, a couple decades ago, when I was more tuned in to the non-attainment issues, we were looking at that time at what industries were causing our baseline pollutant level that were really causing us the biggest problem. Is there anybody that is studying that now? Have we looked at that? Back in geologic time, there were a couple of power plants and chemical plants that were causing us really the problem. And I was wondering if we could identify those now, and if we have, the next couple of years, $5, $10, $15, $20 million of basically pollutant money out there, we might look at talking to those industries and the TCEQ to see if we can't help incentivize some better control measures on those plants. That may be the most significant thing we can do.
Bob, I'm gonna ask Kathy to jump in here in a minute. I'm sure she knows much more about this than I do. So the answer is yes. I know. I forget what it was, air quality task force. I forget what the name, but anyway, yes, they've been looking at some of that, and yeah, that Fayette power plant was a big source of issues, but also Houston itself in terms of transport. So stuff floating in. So as we did when I was in Houston, we claimed transport issues from Louisiana in the summer, and then we claimed it from California in the winter. So I'm going to claim Dallas in the winter and Houston in the summer. But in terms of that Fayette plant is the thing I know of that was one of the worst things. I don't know if there's something else. Now, a lot of ours, at least on the ozone side, has really been auto related. On the PM 2.5 issue, it's the quarries that are causing sort of the biggest problem for us. And Bob, as you know, Williamson County has the highest number of quarries in the state. Additionally, with PM 2.5, when the fields are burned in the fall and in the spring before planting, whether it's here in Texas or in Mexico, the air that's being picked up and is blown in, that's a PM 2.5 issue. When we have wildfires, it's a PM 2.5 issue. But also with all the construction we have going on now in terms of, building factories or things like that, all those trucks going out and going over unpaved roads, that's a PM 2.5 issue. So one of the things I hope we're going to talk about in terms of a strategy that can help, at least on PM 2.5, is to ask localities to, when they're issuing permits, to ask those folks to be wary of dust issues on their construction sites as they're building facilities and trying to wet down the soil so that we don't have as many PM 2.5 issues going forward. But Kathy, can you jump in on the first part of Bob's question?
Sure. Thank you, Ashby. And Ashby made a lot of really good points. One thing, Bob, that we did back in the day was actually cement kilns are a big source of NOx. And working through the CAPCO group, they were able to get the cement kilns to voluntarily agree when ozone action days were called to reduce their operations just on those specific days, because it's a benefit for the cement kilns too. They don't want to become non-attainment because then they have to put on a lot more controls and do a lot more. It's going to cost them more to be non-attainment than it is to just reduce their activities on just a certain number of days. With ozone, it's kind of easier to tell because you'll know ahead of time when those days are. They've got that down pretty well to call it. So there's a lot of opportunity for voluntary measures. And your idea of getting a pot of money to help them out is fabulous, but I'm not sure what CAPCOG is doing in regards to all this right now, but that would be a good
Well,
thing.
I'm just saying, I'm looking at those other pots of money that CAMPO has, and if you go to a business and say, we need you to control your dust, that's great. But if you say, we understand it costs you money to control your dust, let's work together to come up with a plan and we'll chip in a few dollars to help, that goes a long way to get their attention to try. I mean, Texas Crestone is a dust disaster. Anybody that drives by that every morning. So I think that's something that we really need to start working on a little bit harder now on both of those issues.
Yeah, and I'm
Anyway.
not sure what the funding eligibility is for that carbon reduction plan, whether that's something that is allowable or not, but if it is, that would be a great idea.
So one of the other things, Bob, that I think we need to be looking at, and this is going back to the ozone issue as part of the early action compact that was done by this region several years ago, well before me. Both Travis and Williamson counties agreed to do voluntary emissions testing on cars. I think we're at the point now where we need to be asking Hayes and Bastrop to do the same thing.
I will say that was one of the most effective measures that our region put in place, and that we like to think, but that this region, Travis and Williamson put in the vehicles emission testing. In San Antonio, they did not do any emissions testing. They're non-attainment now, and we are still holding our own. So it's a pretty effective measure, and the people don't really seem to mind it. I'm not sure how complicated it is now that we don't have safety inspections anymore, but that would be another really good thing to look at.
Yeah, I mean, they still got to do the emissions testing, Kathy. So I think it's worthwhile, and I agree with you. I think if we can get Hayes and Bastrop to start doing the voluntary testing, I think it's a show of good faith to EPA.
That is true too, and that can go a long way if you're right on the line.
I know that we've had, the topic has come back up in San Marcos about it. So I think that in as much as CAMPO could facilitate something about, starting that question on the county level and the city level. I mean, I've certainly passed it along on my side, but, we have had citizens who have come from Travis County, because there's a lot of people now who've moved out and have moved into Hayes County and commute in, and they've even asked about, where do I get my emissions testing? What is the process for that? So it may be at a point where it's more adoptable than it was last time around.
Good to hear.
Okay, yes, back in the day, I remember when it came around last time, so. All right, any more? I'm looking at hands and I don't see any hands, and I'm sorry, Bob, I just thought you forgot to take your hand down, so I apologize. All right, now Nirav, item 6.
This will be a pretty quick item. A lot of this is going to cover ground that Ryan already covered, so we can just go ahead and skip this slide. And so every year, this body, just like they did last year, has to adopt targets for safety. Last year, not only did you do targets for safety, you also adopted them for infrastructure and system performance. This year, the state finally sent its targets, and for the second column there on the left, you can see that for all of those safety targets, the targets have declined. That is because there is a rule of the IIJA that says that the states must set declining targets. So that is what the state has done, except for the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. That one stayed the same with the previous year. As Ryan has told this body and the board, the CAMPO staff we are allowed to come up with our own targets, but due to the staff requirements, the need to create your own methodology, it just seems like a bit too much of a burden for us to bear at this time. So next month or the next meeting, when we bring this back for a recommendation, staff's going to recommend that we go ahead and adopt the state's targets for safety. For the transit, we are still gathering that information. I believe we have 2 out of the 3 transit providers have provided us that information once we get the final. We'll update the slides here, but I think that's about, oh wait, sorry, next slide. This just shows, that we put our targets on our dashboard. That's on our website. Next slide, please. Oh, no, that was it. So that's it. My presentation. Any questions? I'm available. Thanks.
Okay, so you answered my question. So if we actually didn't meet our target, then what we do is we just put the same target that we had last year, because we can't go up, correct? Okay. Okay, any other questions? All right, seeing none, I guess we will go to report on transportation planning activities.
Everyone, this is Will Liska. Just wanted to let folks know the status of the Regional Safety Action Plan. We are still in active procurement. At the February 12th board meeting, we will recommend a top-ranked consultant to begin negotiations with, but currently still in procurement, about to conduct interviews with a short list of consultants. The other thing I wanted to bring up was the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. So the update of our regional long range plan at the next TAC meeting. I will bring a item to discuss a rough outline of that process to kind of a roadmap to get us to adoption by our policy board by May of 2025, and some dates that will be important to CAMPO member agencies, and particularly to the members of the TAC. So just look out for that item at next month's TAC meeting.
That's all the announcements we have here, Lori.
Okay. Then I guess the next are my announcements. We have our next TAC meeting is February 26th. Policy Board is February 12th. We will be electing new TAC officers on February 26th. I've asked a nominating committee of Amy Robertson, Tom Godala, and Charlie Watts to bring forward folks for your selection at the February 26th meeting. So if you are interested and want to serve as chair or vice chair, you can reach out to me or reach out to one of the nominating folks and let them know of your interest. So with that, seeing no one jump in with any other comments, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn from Ed Collins.
Second, Emily Brown.
Thanks, Emily. All right. Thank y'all very much. Stay dry and stay safe.